Hello, everybody, and welcome back to That Milan podcast. Been absent for a couple of weeks, but we are back. Martino Puccio, Matt Santangelo. If you guys haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel just yet, be sure to do so and give us a like on the video and comment your thoughts on the Lazio match, what happened today in Europa League. This is 2 hours prior to kickoff against Slavia Prague. And then, obviously, what your predictions are for Milan versus Empoli this coming weekend. But Santangelo, how are you? Clean shaven now, too. On top of the haircut, and you got your new kit, even though it's this year's home.
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, as you mentioned, clean shaven, shorter hair, rocking some new attire here. Rafa home kit, authentic. Wanted to make sure I snagged one with the number 10 on it. So so we're pretty much fresh right now. We're fresh top to bottom right now, head to toe.
Yeah, for sure. And you got the black Pleasures kit, so happy you got that in. I had that as well. I think I wore it on the last stream. But yeah, let's get into it. So much has happened since we've last talked. And basically, this was the match. You weren't able to come on post-match for this one. And I think you watched it on delay, or you said you were watching this one on your phone on your way to your trip last week. Milan played on a Friday night, so a little bit earlier than most games. It was absolutely chaotic, as most matches against Lazio are. 3 red cards for them, 2 of which I thought were red cards. I think the only harsh one was Guendouzi, and I know some people want to complain about it that are Laziali, but my point is this. Even if the Guendouzi red card wasn't a red card, Hisai should have gotten a red card for the elbow that he threw. So the fact that those 2 probably should have been switched around, in my case, makes it okay. Luca Pellegrini made the silly, nonsensical decision to tackle Christian Pulisic. If you knew your teammate was out, not only should you kick the ball out, you shouldn't be hitting anyone anyways. Like, why do you think that was an acceptable choice? Didn't really see too many people argue that. Di Bello has been suspended for a month, who was the referee of the match. And then again, we saw a red card for Mauricic, who clearly said something. He didn't even contest to the red card for that foul where he extended his arms, pushing Rafa. Did Rafa sell it a little bit? Yeah, sure. But at the same time, you can't be doing that. That was a foul, but the red card was strictly for what he said to the ref that no one knows. And again, he didn't argue it. So Noah Okafor comes on and is the ultimate super sub, Santangelo. He's Santiago Munez from a goal. Because this guy has been phenomenal for Milan. Injury issues most of this year got him from RB Salzburg, where he was playing well. We knew him because he dropped Kalulu on his ass in the Champions League. But almost every single time he comes onto the pitch as a sub, he makes a significant impact and had 2 goals against Lazio this year, both in each game. So really get into your thoughts on what this game was like, your thoughts on the red cards, and then again, Noah Okafor making another impact off the bench.
Well, I think you've chronicled, more or less of the red card aspect. I don't want to give too much into that because we have a pretty packed show here, and we're trying to get ready for the match to come for Milan in the Europa League. But more so with the performance, all the red card antics and the kind of the shithousery aside, this was a pretty underwhelming and disappointing performance from Milan. I mean, even when they were up a player, like before the second 2, right? The 2 extra red cards, they still look like they were going to potentially just leave Rome with a point. Even Immobile had an opportunity to score a goal and he missed it. Moments before everything else kind of took place. So let's talk about the fact that Milan didn't have a good performance here. And they've been a team that's been typically able to handle Lazio. They've had their number over the past couple of years. We've really gotten some big results from them. More specifically, the Sandro Tonali goal, which was, huge in that victory a couple of seasons ago when we won the Scudetto. So Milan didn't have a good performance. I don't think anyone was particularly poor. It was just one of those matches that was very dull, very boring. The first 45 took place. And I was like, I was in and out, I was traveling, so the connection wasn't that great, but I was seeing some sporadic play. And I was like, that looks like it's going to be a draw here. We don't look, convincing enough in the final third. We don't look like we're up for it. And it's going to be one of those results where we kind of, get a draw, go into the Europa League match and try to handle business there. So I'm glad we got the win. As you mentioned, Noah Okafor, a crucial goal. This is a player that comes off the bench. He came on around the 70th minute. So he played a good chunk of the second half. And that's has been enough for him to make an impact, right? We've talked about
Yeah.
the fact that a lot of his goals, a lot of his contributions have come in very limited, smaller sample sizes. We talked about the Roma game very early on in the season when he was still getting his feet wet, where people were criticizing him and saying he didn't offer much. When the game was kind of Tomori red, we were trying to see the game out. So I
He
think
was incredible that game.
his work rate was phenomenal. He was doing a lot of things off the ball to help Milan win that game down a player. But in this scenario, he gets a key goal, and this is a player that, look, we've talked about, Pulisic, Okafor, and Chukwueze, and I've even been very adamant on the fact that I think one of these players is going to have a very disappointing, or perhaps may even be a flop. Pulisic's been doing what he's been doing. Okafor, despite coming off the bench in most cases, has been delivering some very key goals that are stolen us results. And Chukwueze, although I don't agree with how he's been handled and used, is probably the third player pretty clearly of the new additions that Milan have made in the attack. So a 1-0 win, the red cards, I'm not going to get too much into it. I think that, the game got out of hand. This is a classic case of, Italian officiating really not taking a stronghold on the match and letting it,
And the penalty, the non-penalty call was also correct. I mean,
yeah.
Tati goes in to make contact after Magnan gets the ball. Magnan only had that look on his face because that was a terrible miscommunication between himself and Florenzi on that. That had nothing to do with that. I thought that was the correct call, but you're right though. Ever since that play as well in that match, Di Bello lost all control of it, and it really just got out of hand. But again, the positive side of things were that Napoli beat Juventus, Milan beat Lazio, and even if they played terribly,
and Bologna beat Atalanta.
And yes, and that as well. And looking ahead to Empoli this weekend, we'll get to that. But first, moving on to Europa League. So the Europa League against Slavia Prague is today. So in about 2 hours or so from when Matt and I are recording this, you'll be able to look at it. So either this would age really well from some of our takes within this, or it could be very poor. So it kind of looks like from all the reports that Pioli will be going with the main starters for this one. Leao and Florenzi are both suspended this weekend against Empoli. So that makes so much sense to start them in the first leg. Pulisic actually looks like he's going to start in this one, and Chukwueze probably gets that opportunity on Sunday against Empoli. For me, I totally understand the approach with Pioli like this. I think he might be playing with fire a little bit with Pulisic. Hopefully he doesn't get too many minutes in this, and Milan can get themselves a healthy lead. I think the approach is going to be very similar of what we saw in the first leg against Rennes, where you just want to get up at home by a couple of goals. You don't really have to worry too much about away goals now because that's obviously been scrapped for the past 2 seasons. So with that, Prague, this is a tie that Milan should win. They should advance here, and there shouldn't be any excuses for it, right? Especially after that abysmal Champions League group stage performance that they had. Are you okay with that attacking trident up front? We'll see what the defenders are. I would assume Gabbia is going to start with Teo, probably Florenzi. In my opinion, Florenzi makes sense for this, especially if he's suspended. He's playing very well. He deserves some minutes there. Loftus-Cheek playing behind everybody. Doesn't look like Reinders will start. He's been sitting a lot of the matches recently. Didn't start against Lazio because of the birth of his child. So congratulations to him on his first baby. So yeah, Milan's chances here, I kind of like it. I think they're playing very well in terms of creating chances and scoring. And they don't, I know the second leg was terrible, but those were mostly from conceded penalties and a rocket of a shot for the first goal. I'm actually pretty confident heading in today. I think Milan will score a couple of goals in this one. And Leao should make his impact on Europe once again. So what are your kind of thoughts on the lineups and the approach that Milan will be taking for this match?
I'm pretty fine with the lineup. Look, I think, we've been touch and go with the Europa League really since we understood that once Milan were knocked out of the Champions League, we kind of wanted to see, how players returned from injury, how players, came into form and the timing of everything, right? To kind of feel out how we hoped Milan would approach it and how Pioli would approach it from a rotational and squad usage standpoint. And as we saw, Rennes come the first team we got drawn with, and then now you kind of see how it's like, okay, now you're getting a favorable matchup here. Now it's one of those things where you'd almost be disappointed that Pioli's not go for it, right? Because I think a lot of people, the conversation and feeling was, we don't want the Europa League. We don't want to sacrifice top 4. We don't want to even be in this competition. To now you're like, two pretty favorable matchups, and one here where if you looked at all the teams that Milan could have potentially been drawn with, you'll take this every day.
Correct.
So with that being said, I want to see Milan come out with an aggressive, strong 11 in this first match, because I think they need to set the tone. They need to come out, get goals, and put themselves in the driver's seat for that second leg. Now, that's going to be key, right? Because I think everyone's been talking about, in post Rennes, how, that second game, they gave Milan a real scare. And we talked about it, if Milan conceded a goal in the first 15 minutes, they could be in for some trouble. Credit to Milan
on the 11th minute.
And kind of going within like an exchange of goals. They didn't kind of let it get too tight. So credit there, but that's not the type of match or tie that Milan wants here. So I think it's wise for Stefano Pioli to play the lineup that we see as projected, especially as you mentioned, Martino, with some of the suspensions and players inactive for the game on the weekend against Empoli, who, despite maybe where they're sitting in the table, which is looking much better of late, they're a team that's been playing really well under Davide Nicola since he took over in January. So this is a team that I believe is unbeaten in their last
the Italian Sean Dyche, man.
Yeah, I think he was the coach for Crotone when they avoided relegation.
And I believe Salernitana last year, correct?
And I believe them as well. And he made like a promise with the Crotone players several years ago that if they avoided relegation, he would like bike across Italy or something. I think that was the story. You guys in the comments.
Yes, yeah. I remember that.
So with Milan have to be careful here. I don't want them to not lose sight of the weekend, but I think you have a little bit more of an out on the weekend, to play certain players, because you're like, well, we don't have the layout at our disposal. We don't have certain players at our disposal, so we have to go with a rotated 11 by force. So I'm fine with the lineup, and I feel pretty good that Milan are going to get a positive result here.
Yeah, I think the one of the positives looking at the schedule now, it's you have this match today, you have Empoli over the weekend, which again, even if they're playing a little bit better, that's a team that you rather face when you're rotating. Slavia Prague again, and then you go and face Verona. So technically speaking, Milan could afford to rotate some of these guys, but let's be honest here. Jovic, Chukwueze, whoever you fill in on the left wing for some of these matches, they're all very capable players of doing well against these sides. Because, hey, guess what? This is still Milan at the end of the day. You spent all that money over the last summer, and you expect these guys to step up in these situations. I think Pioli still has done a mediocre job at best at rotating and giving some of these guys minutes to assimilate themselves. Not everybody is a Noah Okafor. Not everybody's a Luka Jovic too, where they're able to just poach these goals. They have to play well over the course of 90 minutes. They have to build up that chemistry. And so sometimes when you see guys get moved around and these rotations are a little bit too much, you could see guys struggle like that. And not only that, it could hurt their confidence because, again, not all players are the same. Every player needs a little bit of a different mix in terms of playing to get well, right? Like, even for example, like when Jovic wasn't getting many minutes, the second he started getting more consistent time, then you saw his level of production increase. With Chukwueze, it's been up and down. And then AFCON, I think it's been a real rough go of him. It's been very similar to what CDK was last year, but I think Chukwueze has produced more. He just needs that sort of consistency. I think this stretch of games right here is where he has to step up. And I think if he puts in some good performances, he could build off of that and help Milan down the rest of the course of the year. Because let's not forget, finishing second is still important in Serie A, regardless of how dominant Inter have been. Finishing second for the pool for next year's Champions League is very important. And again, just even going deeper in Europa League, all the money matters. Any other final notes within these rotations of the matches? We know we got these center backs back as well. Do you agree with sitting some of the main starters in favor of Gabbia because he's played so well recently, and just have, a Tomori and Gabbia next to one another?
I like it. I think he's deserving of the opportunity. We talked about this in the previous episodes, Martino, that it's important for these players to get those European nights. Like these are, yes, this isn't a semifinal of the Champions League, right? But this is an important European competition knockout match. So I think that Gabbia, given how he's played and how steady he's really been since he's returned from loan, he's deserving of this opportunity. So absolutely, I don't have a problem with it. He doesn't have a ton of minutes. because he didn't play like a boatload under at Villarreal. So
Yeah.
he's
He
not
was
like
in
sitting
Europa
here.
League, some
Yeah,
minutes in La
it's not like
Liga. It
he's had
really
a
wasn't
taxing
consistent.
season and he's, an older player. I think that you look at this, what Simon Kjaer is going to give you as far as when he can play and how often he can play. He's a once a week guy at most. You're not going to play him in back-to-back games. So I'm fine with giving Matteo Gabbia the nod here, and I think he's very much deserving of it. And also, you want to see where Fikayo Tomori is, right? He's gotten a couple minutes on the weekend, again, not on the weekend, on Friday against Lazio. So you want to ease him back in, but you also have to sort of, give him more than 10 minutes. I think if you can give him 55 to 60 in this game and then pull him off, hopefully we're in an ideal position where the game is at. And then you can maybe rotate someone in and then give someone else 30 minutes. And then maybe you have Tomori available off the bench on the weekend. I think it's important for us to, see what we have in the players that we just got back, because we saw this with Malik Chow, right? He played against Stade Rennes, and then all of a sudden in that game against Monza, he looked like a train wreck. So you need to give these players that confidence of minutes, get the ball under their feet, do some good things on the pitch, play some positive, get some positive form accrued, and then hopefully you can ride that the rest of the season. So I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I agree, and I always bring up the situation of where Kalulu and Tomori were locked down as center backs towards the end of that stretch for the Scudetto. Virtually benched Kier and well, I think Kier was hurt, but Romagnoli at the same time. You just have to ride with the hot hand. Because not only that, I think that would hurt Gabbia's confidence on some level. I'm not saying he's mentally fragile as a player, but that doesn't help anybody. I think positive reinforcement and rewarding guys who play well matters. And I think Pioli will do that. And good for Gabbia. This is, like I said months ago, when he came back and started playing well, this makes Milan's market easier in the summer, and you know what you have in certain areas and where you could replace guys. Still just the age of 24, turning 25 in October. So it's kind of nice to see him get into a groove and potentially be a serviceable center back for the club for 10 years, because that's honestly the capability of a player like that, who could just rotate in as like a fourth center back type, especially for a club like this. So heading over to the weekend, this match has a longer shelf life than most, and for what we're talking about topics wise for this video, Milan Empoli. We won earlier in the season against them. We loaned out Daniel Maldini to them, but he didn't end up staying there. He goes to Monza, where he obviously got an assist against us, and then I believe he scored in another match as well. So kudos to him. That's great to see. But as far as Milan Empoli go here, you're talking about Davide Nicola, who has been the Sean Dyche of Serie A, being anti-relegation. This guy has really changed the way that they play. Their approach is going to be entirely different. It was a 3-0 victory back in, I believe it was January. But with that, I think Loftus-Cheek's strike in that game was phenomenal. Chaka Traore also scored in that one, and then a Giroud penalty. So it was a 3-goal win, really one of those comfortable Serie A wins that Milan have not really had as of late. But as we saw last year as well, in April, a 0-0 draw against Empoli, Milan at times rotating within Europe, played down to their opponent. Do you see that kind of being the vibe here for this one?
I don't think so. I think that we have to respect Empoli's form. We have to respect the job that Nicola's done in a very short time. Again, it gets a little bit unfortunate that Milan have to come up against them when they're in really good form, because they were down in the dumps when we beat them 3-0, and that game was not even close. I mean, when you have Chaka Traore coming on, getting pretty much his debut and scoring goals, and
I think that was his second goal, right? He got another one in Copa.
Yeah, he got one in Copa like a couple days prior. But when you have a Milan who, by all accounts, haven't had many commanding wins this year, I think you could probably name them on your hand. If I'm being honest, we've had a lot of performances where scoreline indicates that we kind of dominated, but the way the match kind of went, it really wasn't all that convincing from start to finish. That 3-0 victory earlier in the season is obviously what we're looking for here. But when you have certain players that are not available to you, like Rafael Leao, you kind of get a little bit cautious here when you combine it with the fact that, again, Empoli are in fine form, and they're really still in that sort of relegation conversation, despite all they've accomplished so far in the past, handful of weeks. Mm-hmm. Although, again, you can make a case that half the table is in the relegation conversation because it's that
I mean,
just
between 13th
like
and 19th, there's a 5-point gap.
everyone, like every week to week, that's going to be up and down. So I think that Milan have to approach this game with a little bit of caution because they've in recent weeks have proven that they can slip up. Look at the Monza game, prime example of that. Not even a slip up; they got beat outright.
And again, to your point, what I was also going to say, Monza, the first time that they played them, was one of their better performances all season long. So it is very possible we see a repeat of this. But yeah, continue.
Yeah. So I think that, this one's a little tricky for me. As I mentioned, previously, I've listened to the Sempre Milan podcast, as part of my daily commute for work, and they've had very mixed feelings of it. I know Maddie said 1-1. He felt like we were going to draw here. And Torgrud and Ali were more optimistic, although they didn't think that we would batter Empoli. I'm going to stick more so with Anthony and Ali. I think that we're going to get a result here, but I think the result is going to be somewhat on brand of what we've seen from Milan this entire season, where it looks a little patchy. We have moments where we look good and commanding, where we can maybe get a couple more goals, but we don't. And then Empoli hang around, and then we get a goal late and we win 2-1 with a goal late in the 79th minute. I feel like it's going to be something like that because I have to give the respect to Empoli's form and the way they've come out very good in 2024 and gotten some good results. But I do think that Milan will get a positive result, and I do think they'll win on the weekend.
Yeah, so with that, I'm curious as to who plays left wing for this. I think it'll be one of two options, obviously. I think you see Pulisic go there to his naturalized position, or you see Noah Okafor go to the left. Luka Jovic's suspension has been lifted. You just play Giroud a couple days earlier, so I don't really see Giroud starting this one. I think it could be Jovic. Listen, you have Juve, as you mentioned, playing against Atalanta this weekend. Regardless of second place, there's there's teams behind Milan in the standings that are still trying to chase them. That fifth spot has not been solidified as a Champions League spot next year. We saw Lazio get eliminated from the Champions League. We're going to have to see how Napoli and then Inter do as well, because they're in pretty tight ties themselves. Napoli and Barca tied. Inter are 1-0 up, but they're heading to Atletico, so we'll see how that goes. I still think Inter will come out from that one, but don't be shocked if that's a Diego Simeone kind of masterclass in the Champions League where he beats a team that he's not supposed to, and it's a very close tie. So yeah, with that, I just kind of see Milan having to buckle down here and get the most out of some of their starters. If Reinders doesn't start today against Slavia, I do see him starting in this one over the weekend. In a player who plays like Reinders and the amount of minutes that he's had all season, I can't even imagine how important it was for him to get this sort of rest, because a refreshed Reinders is so energetic. He plays so much in terms of, box to box style where he's all over the place. When Reinders is in form, I think he's probably the most dynamic midfielder that they have on the team. To me, in Benacer, in my mind, I haven't seen that type of play from him in quite some time, unfortunately, due to his injuries. But this season alone, when they're on their day and most consistent, it's got to be Tijani Reinders. I think he's a player that will step up this upcoming weekend against Empoli. And with that, you build more confidence because, Matt, as crazy as it sounds, knock on wood, there's only one injury on the team right now, and that's Tommaso Pobega. So that's kind of refreshing to hear in general on Milan's sort of flexibility. And again, no Leao, no Florenzi for this one. I think you maybe see Kalulu get some minutes at right back for a potential sub of Calabria if that were to happen. So yeah, I think it's huge for them to just pick up the 3 points as best they can within this, because they could jump into second place this weekend. It's very realistic. Atalanta are a difficult team. They didn't start Coop Miners and CDK, by the way, against Sporting yesterday. So they also have that little bit of rest. Juve are in a very bad form right now. I think they created enough chances against Napoli. I'm not sure how much you got to check out of that match, but they really blew a lot in that one. It wasn't so much about the scoreline in that.
Yeah.
So I think that one's a little difficult. But again, these are the sort of ties that Milan have to take advantage of, right? Top 4 competitors, team above you in the standings is facing a difficult team. You have to get that, right? Because we saw that against Monza as well. There's a lot of parallels to draw here between these two ties, is that Juve were playing whoever they did. I think they drew against Lazio or some team, and Milan had the opportunity to jump them against Monza, and they ended up losing and giving Juve a point. But yeah, I don't think there's too much left to say with that. I don't see them going 90 minutes heavy. And again, we preface this by saying we have not seen the first leg against Slavia Prague. So that could change everything significantly in terms of, what to expect in terms of starters and minutes and how they rotate even in the second leg. Say Milan win by a couple of goals today against Slavia. What do you kind of see in terms of minutes given to some of these players for this weekend before we wrap up here?
It's interesting because I think that Pioli's going to look at the fact that they have now more reinforcements now than they have at any point earlier in the season. Defensively, players are coming back in the midfield. You're getting Chukwueze back from, AFCON, and he's being able to be readily available for you. Players are in and out. You mentioned, some of the players through suspension and just, other reasons not being able to be available. But I think more or less this is the most full Milan squad we've had at any point this season. And this is when you want to have those options available to you. You're talking about match day 24, 25. You got your knockout rounds of the Europa League. It's March. You got a couple more months left of the season. This is when you want to be your healthiest. This is when you want to have full health. And when I look at everything, I'm thinking to myself, Pioli could go two different ways here. He can go with a little bit more of a cautious approach and say, well, we want to ease these guys back in. We don't want any players to have any setbacks and get re-injured and re-aggravated. So maybe they're going to ease those players that have just returned. Or he could say, hey, they're available for me. The guys that have been carrying the heavy freight in those other players' absence, they need a breather here. You mentioned Jovic being available, and then, we all talked about how much Olivier Giroud's played and why he's getting kind of ran into the ground. The player could also say, hey, coach, I'm tired. Like, I need a break. We heard Rafa say it a couple weeks ago, right? Remember, we all criticized Pioli, and players came out after, they came out after, or Pioli came out after.
Yeah, well, they were attacking Leao for being, and I'm not going to
more like
towards
his normal self. Yeah. So I think I would like to see Pioli go with his best 11. I mean, we haven't been able to see Pioli play his best 11 and Milan have their best side available to them for prolonged stretches. Let's see it now. This is where the games mean the absolute most. Everything is behind us. We have a good batch of games here in the league. We have a handful of games, hopefully much more coming in the Europa League. Let's play our best lineup. Let's play our best football. And let's see where things stand at the end of the season in both competitions.
Do you have a prediction for the game?
For the Empoli game?
Correct.
Yeah. I said 2-1. I think that Milan are going to have to buckle down in certain aspects of these games. I think Empoli is going to have moments of this match where they look strong, they're lively, they're energetic, and we've seen what these teams are willing to throw at Milan, right? We saw what Monza were willing to do. They're going to commit numbers forward. They have nothing to lose. Empoli have to go in here. It would be something from Empoli to get a result here that would go a long way, not only for the psyche of the team, but also for their a potential relegation battle. So I think that Milan have to buckle down. They have to play a key defensive game and win the midfield battle. I think beyond anything in the attack, because we always create chances. And I think we'll do enough from that department to get the result. But I think Milan really have to not let this game become end-to-end and very open and invite Empoli to play the way they want to play, which is, counterattacking, try to exploit Milan in situations where they have numbers going forward. So I think the midfield and the defense is really where my focus lies. And I think, based on how Gabi has played, based on how Teo's played, and the midfield, you mentioned, Reinders, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, even Ali, who played really well on the weekend against Lazio, was one of the better midfielders and one of the better players on the pitch for Milan on the day.
He really bounces back, man.
Yeah, I think that's really where the focus is, and that's where ultimately Milan will win this game.
Yeah, ultimately, I do see this going 2-0 in Milan's favor. Obviously, I think it's very valid that you were saying that we would concede because that's usually what we do. And playing down to opponents like this, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, I mean, listen, I worry a little bit about what the left wing would look like in this one. I think that they're not going to create as much as some might think. And again, I think that's really predicated on what the midfield will look like. But getting the center backs back that we don't have to see Simon Kjær. I think when you see the athletic dynamicism of some of these players, it's going to start shining. Chow is kind of really difficult to trust him and where he's at right now. Again, this is so I know hate to beat a dead horse here, but how many times did I say this at the start of the season? As much as I like Chow as a prospect, he's super young. You have to expect some of the mistakes here. And some of them are just in what you saw with Musa against Lecce, it didn't really matter that he was playing at right back out of position. Very much like Chow against Monza, these mistakes that they make have nothing to do with the positions that they are playing in. That has to do with experience and just overall knowledge of where you're at. Chow's penalty against Monza was some of the worst 5 to 10 seconds that you'll ever see from a defender. So hopefully he could bounce back from that. And again, shout out to Yassine Adli, by the way. I just want to pull up the statistics on him because he has really shown this season. I have to pull up the data with him. But he is ranking in some of the highest percentiles. And where is this?
Milan reports, I think, reshared.
Milan reports has a graphic here. It's the quickest thing I could grab for the time being. So shout out to them. But again, passes first, short passes first, forward passes first, progressive passes first, passes to the final third first, aerial duels 1 second, which is the craziest one of all. We knew he had this type of ability. We knew that he could shine if given the right opportunity because he virtually sat all of last year. He wanted to stay and prove himself, and look what happened. Yassine Adli, kudos to you. Don't want to go a little bit too far on per 90-minute stats, but the importance in a player of his age playing out of position after sitting the way he did last year, the mental fortitude to move past that and make an impact. And he's only going to grow, by the way. This is probably the worst that you will see Yassine Adli as. So again, approaching the market in the summer as well, people have to keep in mind the players that Yunus Musa and Yassine Adli and a couple of these other players are today will not be the players that we see come January of 2020.
I also think too, I mean, it says a lot how much he's come on mentally, but also from a preparation standpoint. You know, coming into the season, once he was staying and he was confirmed to be in the plans for Pioli, at least on the roster until January, he was pretty much the last option in the midfield. He was below Pobega. He was below Reinders. He was below Loftus-Cheek. He was below Ismail Benacer, although Benacer started the season injured. But this is a player that was, by all accounts, buried in the depth chart for the midfield. And now he's a player that, if he's not starting, he's the first name off the bench for you. So kudos to him. I think, there's a lot of room to grow. I do think that, with a defensive midfielder being able to armor and kind of cover him in that aspect, I think that will help Adli grow exponentially. But I think what he's done this year, really, in my opinion, his first season at Milan, because we haven't seen him like prior, has been very impressive. So, shout out to Yassine.
Yeah. And by the way, Leverkusen down 2-0 in the first half of the first leg of their game. That could be their first loss of the season in Europa League. Again, we appreciate you guys so much. The amount of support that we have been given is substantial. 114 of you were live with me after the Lazio match. That was just fantastic to see all of you there. Again, That Milan Podcast at That Milan Pod on Twitter, but That Milan Podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. So go and subscribe over there. Give us 5 stars. Listen to the entire episode like many of you do. Again, you could listen to this full episode on there. Again, at Martino Puccio everywhere, _ on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, wherever else, obviously this YouTube channel. And then again, for Sant'Angelo, at Matt _ Sant'Angelo everywhere, at AC Milan Bros as well, that he does with his brother Nick. They do a great job in growing that page forever. Any other final comments before we are able to head on out?
No, let's hope for a positive result in the Europa League, and we keep this thing going.
Yeah, absolutely. Other than that, thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time.